Hello everybody, Jonathan Diolio here. Today I would like to address the issue of the Dominican Republic's normalization of diplomatic relations with China. As we have been able to observe over the last couple of years, China has had an increased interest in the Latin American region for geopolitical purposes. It's in the backyard of its nemesis, the United States of America. You can argue, well, Jonathan, China is not necessarily the enemy of the United States. Not necessarily, but it's definitely a competitor. And since the United States has made inroads in China's territory via its influence of countries such as South Korea, countries such as Taiwan, etc., the Chinese are seeking to kind of counterbalance or retaliate by virtue of making inroads in America's backyard, namely Latin America. Now, the Dominican Republic recently, in this May of 2018, normalized diplomatic relations with China, seeking new economic opportunities, but also seeking new sources of financing. Whereas the Dominican economy has performed relatively well over the last 20 years, it has done so partly on the basis of acquiring debt. And recently, capital markets in the West have been charging more interest to the Dominican government when it goes to the market to ask for money, to sell bonds and to bring cash into the economy, because we have here in the Dominican Republic undertaken a significant amount of debt. Now, as the Dominican government seeks to finance its operations, not only the operations having to do with running government per se, but also in what has to do with the electoral dynamic. It is seeking to tap into alternative sources of financing, and China is one of those alternative sources, or maybe the only alternative source, the only significant alternative source. Elections are around the corner here in the Dominican Republic in 2020. The current president has hinted that he wants to run for re-election in 2020. He was initially elected in 2012, then he ran for re-election in 2016. The Constitution actually was modified in 2016 to enable the incumbent to run for president. If the Constitution remained as it was before he decided to run for president, then he wouldn't have been constitutionally able to run for president. Now, he would have to modify the Constitution again in order to be eligible to run for president in 2020. Now, that run for the presidency would require Danilo Medina, that's the name of the current president of the Dominican Republic, would require Danilo Medina to engage in costly political deals with other parties in order to create a coalescence of sorts that would enable him to get reelected in the next presidential election. And this of course will require the president, Danilo Medina, to get his hands on a good amount of cash. Whereas it's not lawful for the incumbent to use government resources to run for any given position, regrettably so, the reality is that the incumbent usually uses the government's resources to do so. So that's an additional reason why the Dominican government is looking for alternative sources of financing. In addition to finding alternative sources of financing, the Dominican Republic argues that it's looking to open our market to the Chinese, and it's seeking also to export goods to China. Yes, right now the Dominican Republic is mainly exporting primary goods, such as banana, pineapple, cocoa, coffee. There are other countries in the region that produce banana, cocoa, coffee at a greater scale than the Dominican Republic, and could sell at better prices to China. Although we could compete, I'm not saying that we can't compete, but there is significant competition in the region, not only in the region but also in Southeast Asia. There are tropical economies or countries that have a tropical climate in Asia that are able to provide China with the goods that the Dominican Republic produces, and it would be more. It is, as we speak, cheaper for China to import those kind of primary goods such as bananas and pineapples from its neighbors in Asia, rather than importing such goods from the Caribbean, thousands of miles away from the mainland. So that's kind of far-fetched for us to think that China is going to be a buyer of primary goods when it can get those primary goods from markets that are close by. It would be much costly for them to buy it from us. Moreover, we're thinking, okay, well, as we open ourselves to China, China's going to send more tourists to the Dominican Republic. As you might be aware, the Dominican Republic's economy depends on a couple of sectors, highly depends on a couple of sectors. The Dominican Republic is highly concentrated, and most of its GDP comes from tourism, remittances, mining, and free trade zones. Okay, so we're thinking, well, if we open up to China, they're going to send us a lot of tourists. I mean, China has a population of 1.3 billion. Imagine how many tourists would come to the Dominican Republic. Well, that's a possibility. But if we look at Cuba, which has normal diplomatic relations with China, and it has had those normal diplomatic relations with China for a while now, they received less than 40,000 Chinese tourists a year. So for us to think that all of a sudden, as we open up to China, we're going to receive something in the order of 500,000 or 1 million Chinese tourists, it's a little far-fetched. The Chinese don't necessarily love the tourism that we offer, the touristic package that we offer, that of sun, sand, and sea. We're trying to diversify our value proposition when it comes to tourism, but the fact of the matter is that our value proposition is characterized by offering to tourists sun, sand, and sea. Nothing necessarily more than that. Although we have the potential of going beyond sun, sand, and sea, at present that is what we offer. And the high-quality infrastructure that we have is in the east, in the eastern part of the island. The eastern part of the island is very sunny. It doesn't rain that much, and it doesn't have any mountains. It's practically like Florida. It's plain, if you will. Very beautiful, beautiful beaches, beautiful sand, beautiful people. But it is not in correspondence with what the Chinese people usually like. The Chinese people don't necessarily love the sun. Yes, they like mountaineering, if you will, and whereas we have the potential here in the Dominican Republic of developing that area of tourism, it is not developed at present. So, at least in the short run and medium run, we're not going to be able to capitalize on that. Another concern that I have with the normalization of diplomatic relationships or relations between the Dominican Republic and China is the fact that China is not usually very straight. China's not a straight shooter when it comes to trade. It has, for a long period of time now, manipulated its currency. It has devalued its currency. And at this point, I have to mention that there's a fundamental difference between devaluing the currency and seeing a depreciation in the currency. Yes, a depreciation in the currency comes about as a result of market dynamics. Yeah, supply and demand. When we see revaluation or a devaluation of a currency, that has to do with government intervention. So the government is intervening to artificially devalue the currency, to achieve a given goal. What is the goal here? To keep exports high, to keep them relatively cheap to the rest of the world. Now, if exports are artificially cheap to the rest of the world, then it's competing unfairly with the rest of the world. Yes, that is one of President Trump's main arguments against China. Yes, they devalue their currency and they kill our businesses in the United States, and we cannot compete on a level ground because of that, because they cheat. Yes, and that's true. They do devalue their currency. Now, when it comes to the Dominican Republic, that can affect its economy in a very significant way, because the Dominican Republic has been struggling to develop its value-added sector for the last 30 years, and it has not gotten that far in their capacity, in our capacity to add value to primary goods. If we establish, and we have already established, normal diplomatic relations with China, and as a consequence of the normalization of those diplomatic relations, increase our trade with China, then they're going to dump more of their products here. They're products that are artificially low priced because of the devaluing of their currency. Now, whereas China has artificially devalued their currency, the Dominican Republic has artificially revalued its currency. So the value of the Dominican currency, it's above what it should be, according to market dynamics. Why? Because we receive about $5 billion, if not more, in remittances on a yearly basis. And those remittances are mainly dollar denominated. So when we receive remittances that are dollar denominated and we're not giving anything in return to those that send the money, for receiving that money, what happens to the value of the dollar? It goes down. And what happens to the value of the Dominican peso? It goes up. And as a result of that, exports go down. Yes, because it's more expensive for the rest of the world to buy Dominican goods because of that revaluation of the Dominican currency as a result of the remittances that we receive from abroad. That's a unilateral transfer. When I say unilateral transfer, I refer to the fact that as we receive that unilateral transfer, by definition, we're not getting anything in return. So if I sell you this cell phone, you give me money. Yes? So there's a balance, there's an equilibrium in that transaction. Now, as a country receives money, as it receives, in this case, dollars, the value of the dollar goes down because we're not giving anything in return. And what happens to the value of the peso? It goes up. As a result, exports decrease and imports increase. Now, if we increase our economic partnership or relationship, if we deepen our economic relationship with China, and when I say we, I refer to the Dominican Republic, although I'm both from the Dominican Republic and from the United States, but now I'm speaking on behalf of my fellow Dominicans. If we engage in increased trade with China, then they're not necessarily going to help to the amelioration or improvement of our economic apparatus and what has to do with our capacity to add value, given their unfair trade practices with regards to their currency, which is artificially cheap. So people want to buy cheap things, and we start buying cheap Chinese products, and we overlook the development of our industrial base, which is what gives us the basis for real and significant development in the medium and long term. So that's all for now, folks. I'm just laying a couple of facts and perspectives on the table. Feel free to comment. Feel free to stay connected to yours truly via YouTube, via Facebook, via my webpage, www.jonathandolio.com, Instagram at Jonathan Dolio Puig. That's my second last name, Puig. That's JONATHANDOLEO PUIG. Yes, looking forward to your comments. I remain. Many blessings.